Hi, boys and girls. I'm Miss Shakita, and I'm here with Miss Lydia, who will be your teacher today. Today, we will learn about amphibians. But first, let's review what we learned last time we were together.
Thanks, Miss Shakita. Hello, friends. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. We are going to start by reviewing what we have already learned. Boys and girls, can you describe what you see and how it relates to what we have been learning? Yes, that's right. It's a fish. Which of Rattenborough's friends is a fish? Right. Paolo the piranha is a fish. Miss Shakita, I have a question for you and the boys and girls at home. Which group makes up the largest group of the 5 vertebrate animal groups?
That would be a fish. They are the largest group of vertebrates.
That's right. Shakita, I have another question for you and the boys and girls at home. Where do fish live?
Fish live in freshwater and saltwater.
That's right. Let's take a look at this classification chart as a guide to review the main characteristics of fish. We see that fish are aquatic, cold-blooded, breathe using their gills, are able to move through the water using their fins and tails, and most fish reproduce by spawning eggs. All right, friends, in today's read aloud, we're going to learn more about another group of animals, amphibians. The word amphibian means living in 2 worlds or living 2 lives. Can you predict what this means as it pertains to the animal group amphibians? Before we get started today, we're going to learn a few vocabulary words that we're going to need to know. Remember that when reading an informational text, you will see the vocabulary word, the definition, and then that word explained in the text. This allows for us to hear the word and to apply our knowledge immediately. Our first word is amphibians. Amphibians are a group of animals that are cold-blooded, live in water and on land, and lay eggs, most of which have moist skin. A sentence to remember this vocabulary word is amphibians live in water and on land. They are unique. Our next word is dormant, existing in a state of rest or inactivity. Miss Shakita, can you think of a sentence for this word?
Yes. The dog was dormant after playing fetch.
That's right. He was worn out and needed to take some rest. Evolved is our next word. It means developed gradually over a long period of time. Our world has evolved is the sentence that we can use to remember the word evolved. Fluctuates means shifts back and forth. Miss Shakita, can you think of a sentence for the word fluctuates?
Well, when I think of the word fluctuates, I think of the weather. Sometimes the temperature fluctuates between warm and cold.
That's a great example, Miss Shakita. Our next word is morph, and it means to change form. A sentence for this one is the caterpillar will morph into the butterfly. And you can see on the image that I wonder if our amphibian is going to morph. Our next word is shed, to drop, cast off, or separate from something. Miss Shakita, can you think of a sentence with the word shed?
Yes. A sentence with the word shed is, I shed my jacket when I came in the house because I was hot.
What a great sentence. Yes, both animals and people can shed things. Our next word is transformation, which means changing appearance. A sentence for this would be we painted the bedroom and put in new furniture. The room had a transformation. Our last word we need to know today is wetlands, land that is moist soil and is covered with shallow water. A sentence for this is the wetlands are home to many animals. We are going to have another special guest reader today, Miss Candy, who's going to be reading to us as Rattenborough.
I'm so excited.
Thank you, Miss Lydia and Miss Shakita. This will be a great time to check our predictions and to also predict if amphibians have characteristics that are similar to fish or different from fish. I'm back, everybody, and today I've brought some excellent slides of Tabitha Toad and Paolo piranha to show you, so we can compare how scientists classify them in the taxonomy of animals. Tabitha is not a fish, but she and Paolo are similar in many ways. It's true that Tabitha and Paolo don't look very much alike, but as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. Miss Lydia, do you know what that saying means?
Yes, you cannot always tell everything about something just by its appearance.
That's right. When classifying animals, scientists often search for similarity as well as differences. One similarity between Tabitha and Paolo is that, as you know, they are both members of the animal kingdom. You've learned that scientists classify animals as cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Does anyone know to which category Tabitha belongs? Do you think that her body maintains a constant internal temperature like yours? Or does her temperature adjust to her surroundings like a fish does? Yes, her body temperature fluctuates, so she is classified as a cold-blooded animal like Paolo. That's another way they are similar to one another. They are both animals and they are both cold-blooded. Now take a closer look at Tabitha Toad. Can you tell just by looking at her whether she is cold-blooded or warm-blooded? No, but once you learn a bit more about her habits, you will understand how scientists determined that she is cold-blooded. You know that scientists also classify animals according to whether or not they have backbones. Think about what you learned about Tabitha's backbone. Yes, there it is, just like you and Paolo, Tabitha has vertebrae, a column of bones all down her back. Who remembers what scientists call animals with backbones? That's right, she's a vertebrate. So Paolo and Tabitha are both cold-blooded vertebrates. Does anyone remember any other fish characteristics? Miss Lydia, do you remember?
Yes, fish live in water, breathe with gills, have fins and scales, have bony or cartilage skeletons, and most lay eggs. That's the information we have on our classification chart.
You're correct. Those are great answers. Make a prediction about which characteristics Tabitha shares with Paolo. Do Tabitha and other toads have gills, scales, or fins? Do they lay eggs or live in water? These are rather tricky questions because toads belong to a group of animals that change during their lifetime. Their bodies change, their habits change, and their habitats change. I'm going to share lots of information with you today, so get ready for some miraculous surprises. Before we go any further, I want to introduce the name of Tabitha Toad's group of animals. Some of you may know it already. How do scientists classify toads? Yes, they are members of a class of animals known as amphibians. Most amphibians spend part of their lives in water and part on land. Who remembers what the word amphibian literally means? That's right, living two lives or living in two worlds. Were your predictions correct about how the meaning of the word amphibian relates to this group of animals? Toads love the water. Like all amphibians, Tabitha began her life as an aquatic animal living in water. She spends most of her time on dry land now. In fact, she loves the woodlands. But every spring, she makes her way to a small freshwater pond in the wetlands to lay her eggs. That's why Tabitha was in the wetlands when I took this picture of her. Just before I took this picture, she laid a few thousand eggs in the shallow water. Toads must lay their eggs in water because their soft, jelly-like coverings can easily dry out in the air. Come and see. Like fish, amphibians reproduce by spawning. A male toad fertilized these eggs after the female deposited them in the water. Soon, many of them will hatch into larvae, just like fish eggs do, but most of the eggs will never hatch. Can you think of why this is so? There are many ways that eggs can be destroyed: by becoming a tasty meal for a predator, being washed away in a flood, or drying up if there's not enough rain. The small percentage of eggs that do hatch will move on to the next stage of development. This is the larva stage of most frogs, toads, and salamanders. We call them tadpoles. Tadpoles have gills just like fish and use their gills to breathe underwater. They are herbivores and eat tiny aquatic plants, but they're in constant danger because other fish can swallow them whole. Most tadpoles don't survive, but those that do survive undergo a miraculous change. They morph or change into very different looking creatures with very different habits. This transformation process of changing appearance from one stage to another is called metamorphosis. Notice how the word morph is part of the word metamorphosis. Miss Lydia, do you remember another animal that morphs?
I remember that caterpillars morph into butterflies or moths.
Way to think, that's right. As tadpoles grow, skins begin to cover their gills, and they grow lungs so they are able to breathe air on land. Tiny legs appear. They begin to look more like land creatures as their tails disappear. Several species of frogs that live in the wet tropical rainforest skip the tadpole stage. Their eggs hatch, and the young are miniature versions of the adult frogs. The Surinam toad's eggs develop in pores on the adult's back until they emerge fully developed. Those amphibians that survive to adulthood will be hopping and crawling around on land searching for food, just like Tabitha. Plant life will no longer interest them. Instead, they'll snatch up birds, worms, spiders, and slugs with their sticky tongues. Most adult amphibians are carnivores. Some of the toad's larger relatives, like bullfrogs, even eat small mammals and birds. The world's biggest frog is the West African Goliath frog. It is the size of a pet cat and eats other frogs, baby crabs, and snakes. Frogs and toads are the largest group of amphibians. Because they have so many of the same characteristics, many people have a difficult time telling them apart. The main difference between them is that toad skin is a bit drier than frog skin. Remember that although together they make up the largest group of amphibians, they are not the only group of amphibians. In order to study amphibians better, scientists classify them into 3 separate groups. Have you ever seen a salamander? Scientists classify salamanders and their close relatives, newts, as a second separate category of amphibians. Perhaps you've seen these 4-legged, tailed animals while hiking in the woods or even in your own backyard. Sometimes salamanders are confused with lizards, but salamanders are amphibians. Lizards belong to another group of animals that we will talk about on another day. Skin is one of the amphibians' most important organs. Tabitha and other toads like her have skin that is dry and leathery. Other amphibians have slimy skin because their skin needs to stay moist in order for them to breathe. Amphibians use their lungs to breathe on land, but also draw in oxygen through their skin. In order for this process to work properly, the skin of most amphibians must be kept moist. A word of caution here. When you handle frogs and salamanders, be sure to keep the animals moist so that their skin doesn't dry out. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to get the oxygen they need. In order to stay wet, amphibians will hop into water or crawl beneath a moist log. Most frogs, toads, and salamanders molt or shed their skin, often eating their own skins for extra nutrients once they are shed. The third and smallest group of amphibians lives deep underground. Look at this picture and see if you recognize them. What do you see? They do look like earthworms, don't they? But earthworms are not amphibians. Rather, these tube-like creatures, not nearly as common as earthworms, belong to the group of amphibians known as sih-sill-yuhns, or slow worms. They look a bit like other amphibians, only without legs. They need very wet conditions to live in, tropical or warm climates only. The interesting animals range in size from only about 5 inches to more than 5 feet long. They have very sharp teeth and large jaws. And guess what? Sih-sill-yuhns have 2 lungs. These legless pattern breakers live most of their lives underground, coming up only occasionally to feed. Most scientists generally agree that amphibians evolved from an early group of fish with lobed or fleshy fins hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the dinosaurs. Scientists continue to study fossil remains, trying to figure out exactly in which way this slow change occurred over a long period of time. Fossils are preserved bodies or imprints of a plant or animal from long, long ago. Today, amphibians live everywhere on Earth except Antarctica. Because these cold-blooded vertebrates depend on moisture to live, many of them live in tropical rainforest or near rivers, lakes, and streams. Amphibians that live in cold climates become dormant as their bodies slow down in winter, burrowing deep underground or burying themselves in the top layer of mud at the bottom of ponds to stay warm. Dormant amphibians hibernate, living off stored energy for months at a time. Next time we meet, you will learn about the way scientists classify snakes, like anaconda. I'll give you a hint. Remember when I said that salamanders are often mistaken for lizards, but that lizards belong to a different group of animals? Well, Anna belongs to this same group as lizards. Does anyone want to predict the name of that group? Well, wait and see if you're right. For now, I want to congratulate you all on being such good sleuths or detectives. Any taxonomist would love to have you help classify Earth's animals. See you soon.
Thank you, Miss Candy. That was such great information about amphibians. Miss Shakita, were your predictions correct about amphibians and fish being similar or different?
I believe so. Amphibians live partially on land and partially in the water. Many amphibians begin life underwater. As they grow, they live mostly on land.
Right. And I learned that amphibians and fish both begin life underwater, breathing using gills, reproduce by laying eggs, and are cold-blooded vertebrates. I also learned that amphibians live on land and in water, whereas fish live entirely in water. Amphibians' gills develop into lungs. Was there anything else that you learned, friends at home? How about this? After toads become adults and live on dry land, why do they go back to their wetlands every spring? That's right. They go back to lay their eggs. Here's another question for our friends at home. You learned that a tadpole, a type of baby amphibian, breathes through gills like fish because it lives primarily underwater. But how do the adult frogs breathe? Rattenborough told us that the adult frogs breathe with their lungs and through their skin. That's so cool. I can see now that amphibians really do live two lives and spend time in two worlds.
Oh yes. Boys and girls, you have been great listeners today. We'll be back soon to learn about some more amazing animals. All rights and credits for today's lesson belongs to Core Knowledge Language Arts. We would like to thank them for publicly sharing these valuable resources. The views and opinions expressed in this lesson are those of the Core Knowledge authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Mississippi Department of Education. Bye, friends.